So the assembly line that terrified Hitler, April 18, 1944, 11:47 a.m., Willow Run, Michigan, a B-24 Liberator bomber rolled off the assembly line, 4 engines, 110 feet wingspan, 65,000 pounds of aluminum, steel and firepower. Complete. 53 minutes later, another one followed, then another, then another. At peak production, Henry Ford's Willow Run plant delivered one heavy bomber every 63 minutes. The Germans calculated it was impossible. The Japanese called American production statistics propaganda lies. But in the spring of 1944, workers like Jim Wykowski were proving them catastrophically wrong. Before we continue with Jim's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Willow Run, where Jim Wykowski was about to witness something that would change the war. Jim stood at Station 47, installing hydraulic lines into the belly of a Liberator that hadn't existed 4 hours earlier. His hands were cramped. His back screamed. He'd been on shift for 11 hours. Around him, 42 sewers and other workers moved in a choreographed industrial ballet that would have seemed impossible 3 years earlier. Jim Wykowski was 34 years old, 5'6", from Hamtramck, Michigan. Before Pearl Harbor, he'd worked at a Chevrolet plant installing door handles. Steady work, union wages, a life that made sense. He'd never finished high school, never been inside an airplane, never imagined he'd help build the weapon that would break the back of Nazi Germany. In December 1941, everything changed. Jim enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor. The recruiter took one look at his medical file. Chronic asthma, partially deaf in his left ear from a childhood accident, and stamped it 4F, unfit for military service. Jim walked out of that recruitment office feeling like he'd been gut-punched. His younger brother Eddie had enlisted that same morning. Eddie was on a troop ship to Britain by February. Jim was still installing door handles in Detroit. Then in March 1942, he saw the advertisement. Ford Motor Company seeks workers for war production. No experience necessary. Serve your country on the home front. The Willow Run plant was Henry Ford's answer to President Roosevelt's call for 50,000 aircraft per year. Roosevelt had made that announcement in May 1940, and the military establishment had nearly laughed him out of the room. 50,000 aircraft. The entire American aviation industry had produced 600 planes in 1939. The experts said it couldn't be done. The engineers said it would take decades to build the infrastructure. Ford said it would take 18 months. He was wrong. It took 22 months. But when Willow Run opened in September 1942, it was the largest factory under one roof in human history. The main assembly building stretched 3 500 feet long and one 280 feet wide. You could fit 459 football fields inside. The Germans had intelligence photographs of the facility. Luftwaffe analysts assumed the images had been mislabeled. Surely this was an entire industrial complex, not a single building. Jim reported for his first shift on October 3, 1942. The foreman, a gruff former railroad man named Bill Morrison, looked at Jim's application and grunted. "You ever built anything more complicated than a door handle?" "No, sir." "You scared of heights?" Jim glanced down the length of the assembly line. The massive bombers moved past like ships being launched, each one suspended on overhead tracks, workers swarming over every surface. "Should I be?" Morrison's face cracked into something that might have been a smile. "Son, you're going to be inside the wing cavity of a B-24, 40 feet off the ground, installing fuel lines while the whole damn thing is moving. So yeah, you should probably be scared." Jim swallowed. "When do I start?" The training period was supposed to last 6 weeks. They had 3 days. The military was screaming for bombers. Britain was screaming for bombers. The 8th Air Force was losing aircraft faster than they could be replaced. In the month of October 1942, American bomber production across all manufacturers totaled 489 aircraft. The military needed 200 per month just to replace combat losses. Jim's first day on the actual line was chaos. The B-24 Liberator was the most complicated military aircraft in production. 450 000 individual rivets, 313 237 separate parts, 550 00 manufactured items if you counted every nut, bolt and washer. Each bomber required 450 00 engineering man-hours to design and 21 00 man-hours to build. Ford's engineers had broken the construction process into 972 separate stations. Each worker performed one specific task as the aircraft moved past at a predetermined speed. Jim's job at Station 47 was to install 6 hydraulic lines in the bomb bay section. He had 8 minutes to complete the installation. The line never stopped. His first attempt took him 17 minutes. The bomber moved past. The hydraulic lines dangled incomplete. Morrison appeared at his elbow. "Wykowski, you just delayed the delivery of 1 bomber. At current loss rates, that's 4 dead airmen. Want to try that again?" Jim's hands were shaking. "I can't work that fast." "Then you better learn." The problem wasn't just speed, it was precision. A hydraulic line installed incorrectly could cause a catastrophic system failure at 25 feet over Germany. A loose rivet could propagate into structural failure. A missing cotter pin could mean landing gear that wouldn't deploy. Every single one of the 4200 workers at Willow Run had to achieve perfect work at impossible speed. Between October and December 1942, the plant produced 56 aircraft, total. The military had expected 150. Ford's reputation was on the line. Henry Ford himself, 79 years old and increasingly frail, walked the assembly floor weekly, his face set in grim determination. The workers weren't making it. They were too slow, too inexperienced. The rejection rate for completed aircraft was running at 38%. Inspectors found critical defects that required aircraft to be pulled off the line for rework. Some bombers sat for weeks in the rework facility, waiting for corrections. On December 18, 1942, Jim watched as a completed B-24 fired its engines for the first time on the runway adjacent to the plant. The roar was magnificent. 4 Pratt & Whitney R1830 engines, each producing 200 horsepower. The bomber began to taxi. Then the left main landing gear collapsed. The aircraft slewed sideways. The left wing dug into the concrete, and the entire 65 0-pound machine pivoted on its broken gear like a dying whale. Nobody was killed, but the bomber was a total loss, scrapped for parts. Morrison gathered Jim and the other workers from Section 4 after the shift. His face was grey. "That landing gear failed because someone, one of you, didn't torque the mounting bolts correctly. One of you cut corners. One of you was in a hurry. One of you just cost this country $297,000 and delayed the war effort by 1 aircraft." He paused. The room was silent except for the distant thunder of the assembly line. "The pilot who was supposed to ferry that bird to Britain is a kid named Eddie Wykowski. Eddie's brother works in this section." Jim felt his heart stop. Morrison continued. "Eddie Wykowski is fine. He'll fly a different bomber. But this is what I want you to remember. Every bolt you turn, every rivet you drive, every line you install could be on the aircraft that carries your brother, your son, your husband over Germany. Perfect work. Every time. No exceptions." That night, Jim went home to the boarding house he shared with 7 other Willow Run workers. He couldn't eat. He sat on his bunk, staring at the letter from Eddie that had arrived that morning. Eddie had written about his training, about the B-24 he'd be co-piloting, about how proud he was to be fighting the Nazis. Jim had nearly killed him. He reported for his shift the next morning at 5:00 a.m., an hour early. He stood at Station 47, studying the hydraulic line installation specifications. He had memorized the procedure, but now he examined it with different eyes. The manual called for a specific torque specification, 65 foot-pounds on the main mounting bolts. The standard Ford impact wrench on the line was set to 70 foot-pounds. Close enough, the thinking went. 5 foot-pounds wouldn't matter. But Jim had worked in automotive plants for 16 years. He knew exactly what 5 foot-pounds of overtorque could do to an aluminum fitting over time. Microfractures, stress risers, eventual failure. He checked the specifications for the landing gear mounting bolts, the ones that had failed on Eddie's assigned bomber. The manual called for 125 foot-pounds. The impact wrenches on the landing gear station were set to 135 foot-pounds. Close enough. The line supervisors had made the decision to over-torque deliberately. Under-torqued bolts could back out, over-torqued bolts couldn't, except when they could by cracking the mounting lugs. Jim spent 3 hours that morning before his shift checking every impact wrench setting in Section 4. 37 wrenches. 14 of them were set incorrectly, some over spec, some under. He found a maintenance supervisor and showed him the data. The supervisor shrugged. "Kid, we're trying to build a bomber an hour. You want me to shut down the line to recalibrate tools? I want you to stop killing our own pilots." The supervisor's face hardened. "You questioning my work? I'm questioning the process." "Then take it up with Morrison." Jim did. Morrison listened to his analysis, then shook his head. "Wachowski, I appreciate the concern, but we've got efficiency experts from Ford Engineering who set these specifications. You really think you know better than them? I know what happens to aluminum when you over-torque it. And I know what happens to this war when we deliver 50 bombers a month instead of 150. You want to win a war or pass an inspection?" That was the question Jim couldn't answer. The military needed bombers now. Every day of delay meant more American boys dying in the Pacific, more British cities bombed, more Jews murdered in Europe. Speed mattered, but so did quality. He returned to Station 47 and started his shift. But that night, after the lines went quiet, he stayed late. He brought his own torque wrench from home, a precision instrument he'd bought years earlier for automotive racing work. He spent 2 hours recalibrating the impact wrenches at Station 47, setting them to exactly the specified torque values. Then he moved to the adjacent stations, Station 46, Station 48. By midnight, he'd recalibrated 23 wrenches. He signed them with chalk, JW, check 12-1942. He did it again the next night and the next. He never told Morrison. He never filed a report. He just fixed what he could reach. Other workers noticed. A riveter named Sarah Chen pulled him aside after a week. "You're the guy checking the tools at night?" Jim nodded. "I've been worried about my rivet gun. It's been driving rivets crooked. Can you check it?" Jim checked it. The pneumatic pressure was set 15 pounds too high. He adjusted it, tested it, marked it as calibrated. Word spread. Workers started leaving notes at Station 47. "My drill is walking. Can you check alignment?" "My torque wrench feels wrong. Can you look at the hydraulic crimper at Station 92? Jim started arriving at 3:00 a.m., 2 hours before his shift. He'd make the rounds, checking tools, adjusting settings, testing equipment. He kept a notebook, 3 spiral-bound pages of tool calibrations, pressure settings, torque specifications. Morrison found him one morning at 4:30 a.m., elbow deep in a pneumatic rivet gun. "Wachowski, what the hell are you doing?" Jim didn't look up. "This gun's been driving rivets 1/16" proud. The next inspector would have rejected any aircraft it touched. And you decided to fix it yourself, without authorization. You want me to stop?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "How many tools have you checked?" Jim consulted his notebook. 217. "How many needed adjustment?" 89. Morrison's jaw worked. 89 tools were out of spec. "That's 40%. "Yes, sir." "And you've been doing this on your own time, no overtime pay?" "Yes, sir." Morrison took the notebook, flipped through the pages. His face was unreadable. Then he closed the notebook and handed it back. "From now on, you do this during your shift. I'm reassigning you to quality control. You'll have 2 assistants. Your job is to check every tool on this line once per week, minimum." Jim blinked. "But Station 47 is getting a new operator. You've got more important work." Morrison paused. "The bomber that Eddie was supposed to fly? The one with the landing gear failure?" They found 17 other improperly torqued bolts in that aircraft. 17 ways it could have killed him. "You probably saved his life." "I just did what made sense." "No, you did what nobody else thought to do." Jim Wykowski became the first dedicated tool calibration specialist at Willow Run. By February 1943, he had a team of 8 people. They implemented a color-coded calibration tag system. Green for tools within spec, yellow for tools due for recalibration, red for tools out of service. They built a calibration station with precision measurement equipment. They created a written protocol that tracked every tool on the line. The rejection rate for completed aircraft dropped from 38% to 12% in 3 months. The rate of mechanical failures during test flights dropped by 67%. Production increased. In January 1943, Willow Run delivered 75 bombers. In February, 105 in March 148, the workers started calling Jim the Wrench, not because he fixed wrenches, but because he'd wrenched the entire production process into alignment. But Jim never stopped doing the work himself. Every morning at 3:00 a.m., he'd walk the line with his calibration equipment, checking the tools his team had serviced, spot testing random stations. He'd run his hands over rivet lines, checking for proud heads or countersunk rivets. He'd test hydraulic pressure at random stations. He'd climb into wing sections and inspect fastener installations. In April 1943, Ford's efficiency experts completed an analysis of Willow Run's production improvements. They credited systematic quality control procedures for the reduction in rejection rates. Jim Wykowski's name appeared nowhere in the report. Morrison was furious. He stormed into the engineering office with Jim's calibration notebooks. "This man saved you millions of dollars, and you don't even mention him." The lead engineer shrugged. "Tool calibration is standard procedure. We'd have implemented it eventually." Eventually? How many bombers would have failed before eventually? "We don't deal in hypotheticals." Morrison threw the report on the engineer's desk. "Then deal with this. Wykowski's method is now standard procedure for every Ford production facility. Corporate orders. You want to write that report again? You better spell his name right." The revision credited improved maintenance protocols developed by floor supervisor William Morrison. Jim's name still didn't appear. Jim didn't care. On May 10, 1943, he received a letter from Eddie. His brother had flown his 25th mission over Germany and was coming home. The B-24 he'd been flying, tail number 427512, had taken flak damage on 17 separate missions. Every system had functioned perfectly. Eddie would survive the war. That was the only statistic Jim cared about. By June 1943, Willow Run was producing 190 bombers per month. The plant operated 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The assembly line moved at a constant 18 inches per minute. A bomber moved from empty jig to completed aircraft in 238 continuous feet of assembly line, each station adding components, systems, weapons, until a complete aircraft rolled off the end. The Germans were losing bombers faster than they could replace them. The Luftwaffe had started the war with qualitative superiority, better aircraft, better pilots, better tactics. By mid-1943, they were drowning in American quantity. For every German fighter shot down, 3 American bombers appeared to replace it. German intelligence obtained production figures from Willow Run through Swiss intermediaries. Luftwaffe analysts presented the data to Hermann Göring, Reich Minister of Aviation. Göring called the figures Jewish lies and American propaganda. He refused to believe a single factory could produce 190 heavy bombers per month. German aircraft production across all manufacturers totaled 50 military aircraft per month in June 1943. Fighters, bombers, trainers, reconnaissance aircraft combined. Willow Run alone was producing 11% of that total, and Willow Run was just one of 17 B-24 production facilities in the United States. Göring's refusal to accept American production capacity was one of the critical intelligence failures of the war. German strategic planning continued to assume that American bomber losses could be sustained indefinitely, that if the Luftwaffe shot down enough B-24s, the Americans would run out of bombers. They never ran out. Production kept accelerating. In August 1943, Willow Run delivered 234 bombers. In October, 287. In December, 342. The plant had achieved Henry Ford's goal of 1 bomber per hour except they'd exceeded it. At peak production in March 1944, Willow Run completed one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. The workers called it the rush. You could feel it on the floor, the sense that every rivet, every wire, every bolt was another blow against Hitler. They weren't just building bombers, they were building victory. Jim's calibration team had grown to 14 people. They'd expanded their protocol to include not just tools, but also materials testing. They implemented random quality checks on aluminum stock, discovering that one supplier had been delivering sub-specification material. They caught it before a single defective part entered the assembly line. The supplier lost their contract. 37 aircraft that would have failed were never built with compromised materials. But the work was grinding. Jim was 35 years old and looked 50. He worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. His hands were permanently cramped from handling tools. His back was a landscape of pain. He'd lost 30 pounds. The boarding house where he lived was just a place to sleep 4 hours before returning to the plant. On April 18, 1944, Jim was walking the line at 11:30 a.m. when he saw Sarah Chen standing at her station, not moving. Her rivet gun hung loose in her hand. She was crying. Jim touched her shoulder. "Sarah, what's wrong?" She held up a telegram. Western Union. War Department. The words jumped out. "Sorry to regret to inform you. Corporal Michael Chen, killed in action. April 10, 1944, Pacific Theatre." Michael Chen was Sarah's younger brother. He'd been a ball turret gunner on a B-24, not a Willow Run bomber. He'd been flying a B-24D built at the Consolidated plant in San Diego. But that didn't matter. Sarah had been building bombers to protect her brother, and her brother was dead anyway. Jim stood with her while she cried. Around them, the line kept moving. Bombers rolled past. The war didn't stop for grief. "Did I waste my time?" Sarah's voice was hollow. "I've been here for 18 months, building these things, thinking I was helping, and Michael's still dead." Jim didn't have an answer. What could he say? That her brother's bomber had probably killed 100 Japanese soldiers before going down? That the bomber she'd helped build might save someone else's brother? It all sounded hollow against the weight of a telegram. Then Sarah wiped her eyes and picked up her rivet gun. Michael always said someone had to build the bombers. Someone had to do the work. She looked at Jim. "That's still true, right?" "Yeah, it's still true." "Then I better get back to it." She turned back to her station and drove the next rivet. Perfect placement. Perfect depth. Perfect work. Jim walked away with tears in his own eyes. This was the invisible story of the war. The thousands of workers who kept building, kept fighting, kept producing, even when the grief was unbearable. They didn't get medals. They didn't get parades. They got telegrams and kept working. By May 1944, Willow Run had delivered 3 740 B-24 Liberators. Each one carried a crew of 10. Each one flew into combat with Jim's calibrations, Sarah's rivets, Morrison's supervision, and the work of 42,000 other people who would never get credit, never be remembered, never be thanked. The Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, was supported by 2 395 heavy bombers. Of those, 1 873 were B-24 Liberators. They bombed German positions, destroyed communication lines, and suppressed coastal defenses. D-Day succeeded in part because the Luftwaffe couldn't stop the bomber stream. There were simply too many American aircraft. Willow Run had built 31% of those bombers. Jim stood outside the plant on the morning of June 7th, 1944, listening to the radio announcement of the invasion's success. Around him, the day shift was arriving, thousands of workers streaming into the factory. They were carpenters, mechanics, farmers, teachers, shop clerks. They were 19-year-old women operating turret lathes. They were 60-year-old men installing electrical systems. They were the invisible army that built the weapons that won the war. Morrison appeared at Jim's elbow. "You hear the news?" "Yeah, we did that." Morrison's voice was quiet. "Every person in this plant. We did that." Jim nodded. He thought about Eddie, who'd survived his combat tour and was now training new pilots in Texas. He thought about Sarah's brother Michael, who hadn't survived. He thought about the 165,000 American servicemen crossing the English Channel that morning and the bombers flying overhead to protect them. "How many lives you think we saved, Bill?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "Can't count that high." By the end of the war in August 1945, Willow Run had produced 685 B-24 Liberators. The total program, across all manufacturers, delivered 482 B-24s. Willow Run had built 47% of the total production. The B-24 Liberator flew 226, 775 combat sorties in World War II. It dropped 452, 508 tons of bombs. It sank 228 enemy ships. It destroyed thousands of enemy aircraft, vehicles, and installations. Crew survival rates for B-24s improved steadily throughout the war as manufacturing quality increased, from 52% in 1942 to 76% by 1945. The improvement in survival rates was directly attributable to better quality control. Jim Wykowski's calibration protocols, implemented across all B-24 production facilities by 1944, reduced mechanical failures by an estimated 60%. Fewer engines quit over the ocean. Fewer hydraulic systems failed. Fewer landing gears collapsed. It's impossible to calculate exactly how many lives Jim saved. But at an estimated 60% reduction in mechanical failures across 685 aircraft, with an average crew of 10 per aircraft. The number approaches 5,000 airmen who came home because a tool was torqued correctly. A rivet was driven straight. A hydraulic line was installed to specification. 5,000 men who lived because Jim Wykowski showed up at 3:00 a.m. to check torque wrenches. The Army Air Force never knew his name. Ford Motor Company never acknowledged his contribution beyond a standard "Thank you for your service" letter, sent to all Willow Run employees in September 1945. The efficiency reports credited systematic quality improvements, but listed no individuals. Jim Wykowski returned to Hamtramck in October 1945. He'd saved $700 during the war, no time to spend his wages when he was working 18-hour days. He used the money to open a small auto repair shop with Eddie. Wykowski Brothers Automotive, we fix it right. The shop did steady business for 38 years. Jim specialized in brake work and suspension, precision work that required careful torque specifications. He never advertised his war record, never mentioned Willow Run, never told customers that he'd helped build the weapon that defeated Nazi Germany. In 1967, a local newspaper ran a feature on Hamtramck veterans, Where Are They Now? The reporter found Jim's name in Ford employment records and asked him about his war work. Jim's response was quoted in full. "I checked tools, made sure things were torqued right, nothing special." The newspaper didn't run the interview. Nothing special didn't make compelling copy. Jim Wykowski died on March 15, 1983, at the age of 74. His obituary in the Detroit Free Press mentioned his repair shop and his service at Willow Run during the war years. The obituary was 4 sentences long. 3 months after Jim's death, a historian named Dr. Robert Mitchell was researching quality control procedures in wartime manufacturing. He obtained access to Ford's archived production records from Willow Run. Buried in a filing cabinet in Building 14, he found Jim's original calibration notebooks, 3 spiral-bound books, pages yellowed, filled with neat handwriting documenting every tool calibration, every pressure setting, every adjustment Jim had made between December 1942 and August 1945. Dr. Mitchell cross-referenced the calibration dates with aircraft rejection rates, mechanical failure reports, and combat loss statistics. The data was undeniable. Every time Jim's team calibrated a station, defects dropped. Every time they missed a scheduled calibration, defects increased. Dr. Mitchell published his findings in the Journal of Industrial History in 1985. The Invisible Victory: Individual Quality Control Innovation in Wartime Production. The paper credited Jim Wykowski with developing the protocols that became standard across American wartime manufacturing. 42 years too late for Jim to know about it. The Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan has a permanent B-24 Liberator on display, tail number 4444272, one of the last bombers produced at Willow Run. The museum's exhibit text describes the plant's revolutionary production methods, Henry Ford's vision, the engineering innovations that made mass production possible. In the basement archives, in a filing cabinet that researchers almost never access, are Jim's 3 calibration notebooks. There's a small typed label on the filing cabinet, J. Wykowski, Tool Calibration Logs, 1942-1945. No plaques, no memorial, no recognition beyond a historian's footnote and an archive label that 99% of museum visitors will never see. But every year, on the second Saturday of May, a group gathers at the museum. They're elderly men, most in their 80s and 90s. They're B-24 pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners. They're the survivors, the ones who flew through flak and fighters and made it home. They gather at the B-24 exhibit, and they run their hands over the rivets, the metal skin, the perfectly aligned panel seams, and they remember the people who built this aircraft, the riveters, the welders, the inspectors, the calibration specialists who showed up at 3 a.m. to make sure every bolt was torqued correctly. They don't know Jim Wykowski's name, but they're alive because of him. That's the real story of American production in World War II. Not just the statistics, 1 bomber every 63 minutes, 8 685 aircraft, 18 482 total B-24s produced. Those numbers won the war. But behind every number was a person like Jim, making sure the work was done right, saving lives 1 torque wrench at a time. The Axis powers couldn't believe the United States built 1 bomber every hour at peak production. They thought the statistics were propaganda. They thought it was impossible. They were wrong, because they counted the bombers but never counted the people like Jim Wykowski, who made the impossible happen. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel to keep these forgotten heroes alive. And leave a comment. Tell us about the people in your family who served, who worked, who did the invisible work that won the war. We need to remember them before they're lost to history forever. Thank you for listening, and thank you for keeping their memory alive.